Hello, dear listeners. Today you will hear a story about how a group of civilians were stripped of their identities and forged into hardened soldiers through a brutal psychological gauntlet. By the way, write in the comments which city you were from. We're very curious to know. Now, sit back and enjoy the story. The first thing you learn isn't how to shoot. It's how to stand still for an hour while a man screams inches from your face. That lesson began the moment the bus doors hissed open, spilling us out into the harsh sodium vapor glow of a military processing center, a place designed to strip away every last vestige of who you thought you were. It was well past midnight when our civilian lives ended. The bus had rumbled for hours, a silent, anxious journey punctuated only by the occasional cough or nervous shuffle. We were a motley crew, fresh from homes, jobs, and dreams, all bound for the same unknown. The sudden screech of brakes, the violent lurch forward, and then the abrupt silence, heavier than the rumble, signaled the end of our brief reprieve. This wasn't a stop, it was an ambush. The doors swung open, and the world outside roared to life, a deafening assault that left no room for thought, only reaction. The air was instantly filled with a cacophony of shouts. "Get off the bus! Move! Move! Move!" The words weren't just loud. They were designed to penetrate, to disorient, to dismantle any sense of personal space or control. We stumbled out, blinking in the blinding lights, our civilian clothes suddenly feeling alien and flimsy, almost like a costume we'd forgotten to shed. Drill sergeants, or DIs as we had quickly learned, were everywhere, their faces contorted in expressions of pure, unadulterated fury. They moved with a predatory efficiency, herding us like cattle, their voices a relentless torrent of commands and insults. One DI, a stocky man with a neck like a tree trunk, later identified as Sergeant Ramirez, seemed to have a particular knack for making each recruit feel personally targeted. His eyes, even in the artificial light, burned with an intensity that promised pain, a chilling preview of the demands to come. His presence alone was enough to make your stomach clench. We were pushed, shoved, and yelled at through a series of stations, each one designed to systematically chip away at our civilian identities. First, the paperwork, a blur of forms and signatures, our names reduced to numbers on a roster, our individual stories irrelevant. The pen felt heavy, alien in my trembling hand, as I scrawled my name for what felt like the last time. Then, the haircut. A line of barbers, expressionless, clippers buzzing like angry wasps. The sound of those clippers, a relentless mechanical gnawing, was the soundtrack to our collective defoliation. Each lock of hair falling to the floor was another connection severed from our past, a physical shedding of our former selves. My own hair, which I'd worn long for years, a small rebellion against conformity, was gone in less than a minute. The cold steel of the clippers against my scalp felt like a surgical incision, severing me from my past. I barely recognized the stranger, staring back from the grimy mirror, a raw, exposed version of myself I hadn't known existed. It was a shock, a sudden, stark realization of how much control I had already surrendered. Next, the uniform issue. A mountain of drab green and brown, ill-fitting and smelling faintly of mothballs and stale sweat. A scent that would soon become inextricably linked with the military in my memory. "You'll wear what we give you," a DI bellowed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, tossing a pair of boots that were clearly 2 sizes too big at a bewildered recruit named Miller. Miller, a quiet kid who looked like he'd never seen a day of hard labor in his life, fumbled with the laces, his face a mask of utter bewilderment and a hint of suppressed tears. He looked like he'd been dropped onto another planet. We were all just numbers then, a mass of interchangeable bodies being molded into something uniform, something functional. The process was designed to be dehumanizing, to strip away individual identity and replace it with a collective one, a blank slate for military instruction. There was no room for personal preference, no space for individuality, only conformity and obedience. We were marched into the barracks, a vast open room filled with rows of metal bunk beds, no privacy, no personal space, just a sea of identical beds waiting to swallow us whole. Lockers clanged shut with a metallic finality as we were ordered to stow our meager civilian belongings. My worn t-shirt and jeans, folded neatly, felt like relics from another lifetime, objects from a world that had ceased to exist mere hours ago. The air was thick with the smell of industrial-strength cleaning fluid, sweat, and a faint metallic tang. It was the smell of a machine, and we were the new cogs, forced into its gears. The DIs continued their relentless assault, demonstrating how to make a bed, military style. Hospital corners, sheets pulled taut enough to bounce a quarter. My first attempt was a disaster, a crumpled mess that earned me a fresh round of shouts and a humiliating demonstration that involved the DI tearing the sheets off and remaking it with terrifying precision, his movements sharp and unforgiving. The message was clear. Perfection was the only acceptable standard, and we were far from it. Sleep was a distant luxury, a memory from a softer life. Even when the lights finally went out, plunging the barracks into a dim, uneasy darkness, the room hummed with an unsettling energy. The muffled snores, the creak of bunk beds, the occasional whispered sob. It was a symphony of fear and uncertainty, a collective anxiety that permeated the very air we breathed. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking DI, every creak a potential inspection, a reason for another verbal assault. My mind raced, replaying the chaos, the shouts, the feeling of being utterly out of control. What had I done? Was this a mistake? Had I traded a life of comfort for this relentless, suffocating pressure? The questions swirled, unanswered, as I stared up at the bottom of the bunk above me, the metallic clang of locker doors echoing in my memory, a constant reminder of the cage we now inhabited. The first night was a sensory overload, a relentless assault on every nerve ending. The fear wasn't just of the DIs, it was the fear of the unknown, of what lay ahead, of the person I was rapidly ceasing to be. The disorientation was profound, a deep, unsettling feeling that permeated every thought and every breath, leaving me feeling unmoored and adrift. There was no escape, no corner to hide in, no moment of peace. It was a crucible, and we had just been thrown into the fire, naked and vulnerable, our civilian skin burned away in the searing heat of this new reality. The sheer exhaustion was overwhelming, a bone-deep weariness that promised oblivion. But sleep wouldn't come easily, not with the echoes of commands and the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. As the first hint of pre-dawn light began to filter through the grimy barracks windows, painting the edges of the room in a dull gray glow, a strange stillness settled over the recruits. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull ache of exhaustion and a nascent, terrifying understanding of the new reality. My body was heavy, every muscle protesting, my mind a jumble of fragmented memories from the night. But beneath it all, a faint flicker of something else began to stir, a grim determination. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut, but now it was accompanied by a defiant whisper. I'm still here. A small, defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness. The first full day of training was about to begin, and with it, the grind that would either break us or forge us into something entirely new. The civilian's last breath had been taken. Now, it was time to learn how to breathe as a soldier, to exist within this new, brutal world. It wasn't the push-ups that broke you, it was the relentless, mind-numbing repetition. The first full day in boot camp dawned not with a gentle awakening, but with a jarring, brutal intrusion. The barracks lights snapped on at 0400, a harsh fluorescent glare that seemed to suck the last vestiges of sleep from your eyes. Get up! Get up! Get up! Sergeant Ramirez's voice, a gravelly roar, ripped through the thin air, echoing off the cinder block walls. There was no easing into it, no gradual adjustment. The civilian world, with its soft beds and quiet mornings, was a distant, forgotten dream, a luxury we'd already learned to forget. From that moment, the day became a blur of controlled chaos and ceaseless demands. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear, a scent that would become as familiar as our own breath. We stumbled out of our racks, still half asleep, into the cold morning air for our first taste of physical training, or PT. The rhythmic thud of boots on pavement during a run became the soundtrack to our new reality. It wasn't just about moving, it was about moving together, in formation, at a pace dictated by someone else, for reasons that often felt obscure, yet undeniably urgent. Every muscle screamed, every breath burned, yet the DIs seemed to possess an endless well of energy, their shouts cutting through the morning chill like a physical force. We pushed, we pulled, we ran until our lungs ached and our legs trembled, often with the sun barely cresting the horizon. The physical demands were relentless, a constant assault on our bodies. Push-ups, sit-ups, flutter kicks, hundreds of them, until your body felt like a lead weight, your muscles screaming in protest with every repetition. Staff Sergeant Davis, a man built like a brick outhouse, with a voice that could strip paint, seemed to delight in finding new ways to push us past what we thought were our limits. I remember one session, a grueling incentive training for some collective infraction, perhaps a misplaced sock or a slow response to a command, where we were made to do burpees until several recruits were openly retching. Pukey, Pete, as he was immediately dubbed, collapsed, his face green, and even then, the shouts didn't stop. "Get up, recruit! You think the enemy cares if you're tired?" It wasn't about malice, not truly. It was about breaking us down, stripping away the individual's soft civilian shell, and rebuilding something new, something tougher, more resilient. The sheer volume of physical exertion was designed to exhaust us to the point where our minds would become pliable, receptive to new instructions, new ways of being. Beyond the physical, there was the mental game, equally draining, drill and ceremony. Hours spent marching in perfect synchronization, turning on a dime, saluting with precise timing. The frustration of repeatedly failing a simple drill movement, like an about face, under the watchful, critical eyes of a DI, was immense. You'd get it wrong, and the entire platoon would pay with more push-ups, a collective punishment that quickly taught the importance of individual perfection for the good of the group. The goal wasn't just physical endurance, it was mental discipline, the ability to follow orders without question, to act as a single, cohesive unit. Every command had to be met with an immediate, precise response, a testament to our newfound training. The distant rhythmic sound of gunfire from the range became a familiar backdrop to our days, a constant low hum that served as a grim reminder of the more serious skills we were slowly, painstakingly acquiring, one painful repetition at a time. Classroom instruction, though a brief respite from physical exertion, was another form of mental endurance. Learning military doctrine, the intricate chain of command, basic first aid, and the history of our branch. It was a deluge of information, delivered at a rapid-fire pace, often after a full day of PT and drills when our minds were already numb with fatigue. Sleep deprivation was a constant companion, an insidious enemy. 4 hours, maybe 5, if we were lucky, and then it was back to the grind. The barracks, once a place of initial shock, became a place of fleeting, precious rest, punctuated by the metallic clang of locker doors and the rustle of uniforms as someone inevitably moved too loudly, or the sudden sharp whistle of a DI signaling an unexpected inspection. I remember one night, standing guard duty in the dead of night, the silence broken only by the snores of my bunkmates and the occasional creak of the building settling. My mind, exhausted and frayed, drifted. Was this really what I wanted? The self-doubt gnawed at me, a quiet, insidious voice that whispered temptations of quitting, of returning to the comfort of the life I'd left behind. It was a common feeling, a shared secret among us. Many recruits questioned their decisions in those solitary moments, staring into the darkness, wondering if they had what it took to endure this relentless transformation. But then the sun would rise, a brutal orange smear on the horizon, and the DIs would be there, loud and demanding, pulling you back into the collective, leaving no room for individual introspection. The internal battle against the urge to quit was a daily occurrence, a silent war fought within each of us, a private struggle that few dared to voice. Yet, there were moments, brief and fleeting, when clarity would pierce through the haze of exhaustion. During a long, silent march, the rhythmic pounding of boots, the steady breathing of the recruits around me, a strange sense of peace would settle. In those moments, I'd catch a glimpse of a fellow recruit's eyes, equally tired, equally determined, and an unspoken understanding would pass between us. It was the understanding that everyone was in this together, pushing through the same pain, the same doubt, the same gnawing hunger for sleep. This shared suffering, though not yet fully acknowledged as camaraderie, was a nascent thread, a subtle current of mutual reliance that was slowly beginning to bind us. The sheer physical pain and exhaustion became a constant companion, a dull ache that never truly left, but which, paradoxically, also made you feel incredibly alive, acutely aware of every beat of your heart, every strained breath. The breaking point came for many during the confidence course. It wasn't just a physical test. It was a psychological gauntlet designed to push you to your absolute limits, to force a confrontation with your deepest fears, walls to scale that seemed impossibly high, ropes to climb over muddy pits that promised a humiliating fall, balancing beams high above the ground that swayed with every hesitant step. My arms felt like jelly, my lungs burned, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to stop, to give in. Staff Sergeant Davis was there, his voice a constant goad. "Move it, recruit! You think the enemy will wait for you?" I looked at the muddy pit below, then at the rope ladder swaying precariously above. For a split second, I froze, a wave of pure despair washing over me. This was it. I couldn't do it. But then, a grunt from the recruit behind me, "Miller, come on, Miller, you got this." It wasn't a shout, just a low, strained encouragement, a voice as raw and tired as my own. And something shifted. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about not holding up the line, not letting down the guy behind me, not letting down Miller, who was struggling just as much. I grabbed the rope, my hands raw, blistered, and pulled. Every inch was agony, a burning protest from every muscle, but I kept pulling, one hand after the other, until I was over. The heavy breathing and grunts during PT were no longer just sounds of individual suffering, but a collective symphony of effort, a shared struggle that forged an invisible yet powerful connection. Crossing the finish line of the confidence course, covered in mud and sweat, was a profound moment, though outwardly unremarkable. There was no cheering, no congratulations, just a curt nod from Staff Sergeant Davis and the order to fall in. But internally, something had clicked. The self-doubt hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been dwarfed by a new, unfamiliar sensation: resilience. I had pushed past what I thought was my breaking point. I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed, a deep well of stubbornness that refused to yield. The constant pressure, the lack of sleep, the endless physical demands, they were still there, an unyielding presence, but they no longer felt insurmountable. The process of breaking down civilian habits and building military discipline was undeniably painful, a brutal stripping away of the old self, but it was also undeniably effective. We were still recruits, still learning, still far from polished soldiers, but we were no longer the bewildered civilians who had arrived just weeks ago. We were becoming something else, something harder, more focused, more aware of the strength within ourselves and the quiet strength we drew from each other. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the harsh realities of our day. As we marched back to the barracks, a profound exhaustion settled over me, a bone-deep weariness that seeped into every cell. Yet, beneath it, a tiny nascent spark of understanding flickered. This grind, this relentless crucible, was forging us, shaping us with fire and pressure. We were not yet soldiers, not by a long shot, but the raw material was being shaped, slowly but surely, into something capable of facing whatever came next. The question of why had begun to transform into how. How do we endure? How do we push further? And in the quiet moments before sleep claimed us, a new question began to form, a question that hinted at the bonds forming around us. Who were these people, these fellow recruits, with whom I was sharing this profound, painful transformation? And what would we become together? We were all just numbers then, but in the trenches we became names to each other. The initial shock and relentless grind had stripped away much of our civilian identity, leaving us raw and exposed. But in that shared vulnerability, something unexpected began to bloom: connection. It wasn't a sudden shift, more like a slow, almost imperceptible growth, like moss on a rock. You'd catch it in the brief or stolen glances across the mess hall, the silent nods of understanding, when a drill instructor's tirade felt particularly absurd. The individual struggle, while still present, started to intertwine with the collective. We were still recruits, still peeved snuffy to the DIs, but among ourselves, the roles were shifting. The constant pressure, the endless physical demands, the mind-numbing repetition. It was a crucible, yes, but one that was forging not just soldiers, but a peculiar kind of family. The shared suffering was the bedrock. When Staff Sergeant Davis made us low crawl through a muddy field for what felt like an eternity, The grunts and curses weren't just individual expressions of pain. They were a chorus. You'd hear someone struggling behind you, maybe a choked cough, and without a word, you'd find a way to shift your weight, to make a path, even if it cost you an extra ounce of effort. It wasn't about heroism, it was about survival, and the quiet understanding that if one of us failed, we all paid. Remember Pukey Pete? He was always struggling with the runs, his face green, his lungs burning. We'd fall back, accidentally block a DI's view, or offer a whispered word of encouragement, knowing full well we'd catch hell if we were caught. But the alternative, leaving a man behind, felt worse. Humor, illicit and often dark, became a vital coping mechanism. A whispered joke about a DI's ridiculous haircut during a rare moment of downtime, a shared eye roll when another recruit spectacularly messed up a drill movement. These were tiny acts of rebellion, sparks of individuality in a system designed to extinguish it. I remember Johnson, our platoon's unofficial leader, once miming a DI's exaggerated hand gestures during a particularly dull lecture. The muffled giggles from a bunk, quickly stifled, were a lifeline. It wasn't just about making us laugh. It was about reminding us that we were still human, still capable of finding absurdity in the relentless grind. The mess hall was another unexpected arena for bonding. The food was functional, but sharing a contraband candy bar, smuggled in a letter from home, became a sacred ritual. A small piece of chocolate, broken into a dozen tiny fragments, passed around under the table, was more than just sugar. It was a symbol of shared defiance, a taste of the outside world, and a testament to our growing trust. These were the moments when the we truly started to solidify. We learned to rely on each other, not just for physical support during a grueling exercise, but for mental and emotional sustenance. Private Chen, quiet and observant, often seemed to know when someone was on the verge of breaking. A shared glance, a subtle shift in posture, a quiet word of encouragement. These were the unspoken communications that held us together. It was a silent language, understood only by those who lived it. There was a moment during a night navigation exercise deep in the woods when it truly hit me. We were lost, or at least deliberately disoriented by the DIs. The rain was coming down in sheets, visibility was zero, and the cold was seeping into our bones. Panic started to set in among some of the newer recruits. But then, Johnson took charge, calmly consulting his map, while Smiley Jones kept spirits up with a stream of terrible jokes. Others formed a human chain, ensuring no one wandered off. The synchronized movements of a well-drilled squad, even in chaos, were a testament to how far we'd come. We weren't just individuals anymore, we were a unit, a single organism moving through the darkness. The clink of mess hall trays shared, the collective groan after a DI's command, these were the sounds of our nascent tribe. We were learning to function as one, to anticipate each other's needs, to cover each other's weaknesses. The DIs, despite their harshness, were, in their own twisted way, fostering this teamwork. They pushed us to our limits, knowing that only by relying on each other could we truly succeed. The constant pressure, the shared indignities, the small victories, they all contributed to this profound sense of belonging. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about surviving together. The true test came during the Crucible, a multi-day simulated combat exercise designed to push us to our absolute breaking point. Sleep deprivation was extreme, food rations were minimal, and the physical demands were relentless. One night, during a simulated ambush, our squad leader, a nervous kid named Rodriguez, froze. He just stopped, eyes wide, unable to move. The enemy was closing in. For a split second, I saw the fear, the same fear I'd felt 100 times, reflected in his eyes. But before a DI could even scream, Johnson was there, a low, urgent whisper in Rodriguez's ear, a hand on his shoulder. "Move, Rodriguez! We got you!" Simultaneously, Smiley. Jones laid down suppressive fire with his blank rounds, drawing attention while Chen and I flanked the enemy. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but we moved as one. The collective groan after a DI's command had been replaced by a synchronized, almost instinctual response. We didn't need orders, we just known what to do. We covered Rodriguez, pulled him through, and completed the objective. In that moment, the line between I and we dissolved completely. Later that night, Huddled together in a makeshift shelter, exhausted and filthy, there was a different kind of silence. Not the fearful silence of new recruits, but a comfortable one. Rodriguez, still shaken, looked at us, his eyes filled with something akin to gratitude, but also a new understanding. Johnson just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. We had faced a genuine, albeit simulated threat, and we had overcome it, not as individuals striving for personal glory, but as a cohesive unit. The shared hardship had forged a bond that felt stronger than any I'd known before. The muffled giggles from a bunk, the quiet whispers of encouragement, the synchronized movements, they had all led to this. We were no longer just a collection of recruits. We were a squad, a platoon, a family born of fire and mud. That night, as the cold seeped in and the stars emerged through the breaks in the clouds, I looked around at the sleeping forms of my bunkmates, each one a story, a struggle, a part of this strange new tribe. We had found a sense of belonging in the unlikeliest of places, a connection that transcended the harsh realities of boot camp. And as the final weeks of training loomed, a new kind of confidence began to stir within us, not just in our individual abilities, but in our collective strength. We were ready for whatever came next, because we would face it together. The moment you realize your civilian self is gone, replaced by something different. Weeks had bled into months, each day a relentless hammer blow, shaping us, stripping away the superfluous, revealing the core. The initial shock had faded into a dull ache, then into a strange, almost comfortable rhythm. We were no longer just recruits. We were soldiers in waiting, our movements precise, our responses automatic, honed by countless repetitions. The raw, unrefined edges of our civilian selves had been ground down, replaced by a steely resolve that hummed beneath the surface. The barracks, once a chaotic, unfamiliar space filled with nervous energy, now felt like a second skin, its routines etched into our very beings, as familiar as our own heartbeat. The constant pressure, the gnawing lack of sleep, the unending physical demands, they hadn't broken us. Instead, they had forged something new, something resilient, something that understood the language of endurance. The rifle, once an awkward, heavy piece of metal that felt alien in our hands, was now an extension of our arm, its cold steel a familiar comfort, its mechanisms understood with an almost unconscious fluency. The crisp, metallic click of the safety being disengaged, the smooth pull of the trigger. These were sounds of mastery. Marksmanship, once a frustrating exercise in futility, a battle against shaking hands and misaligned sights, had become a point of quiet pride, each bullseye a small personal triumph. We spoke in acronyms and military jargon, a secret language that bound us together, our conversations laced with the shared terminology of the trained. The confidence course, a beast of ropes, walls, and muddy trenches that had once seemed insurmountable, a terrifying test of our limits, now felt like a familiar challenge. We tackled it with a grim determination, each obstacle a testament to how far we'd come, how much stronger we had become. The scent of damp earth and sweat clung to us as we navigated the course, but there was a new confidence in our movements. We learned to trust our gear, our training, and most importantly, each other. There was a quiet understanding that passed between us, a look that said, "We've been through hell, and we're still standing, together." Staff Sergeant Davis, the drill instructor who had once seemed like a force of nature, an unstoppable screaming entity designed to break us, had subtly shifted. His commands were still sharp, cutting through the morning air, his expectations still absolute, but there was a new nuance in his gaze, a flicker of something akin to respect, perhaps, or at least an acknowledgement of our collective endurance. It wasn't praise, not in the civilian sense, no soft words or pats on the back, but it was there, a subtle nod that we were no longer the green, bewildered civilians who had stumbled off the bus weeks ago. He still pushed, still demanded, his voice a constant driving force, but the underlying message had changed from, "Are you even capable of this?" to, "You are capable, now prove it with every fiber of your being." He saw the transformation, the hardened resolve in our eyes, and in his own gruff way, he approved. We began to see the logic in the madness, the purpose behind the seemingly arbitrary rules that had once infuriated us. Every push-up, every shouted command that echoed off the barracks walls, every grueling march under the relentless sun, had contributed to this profound transformation. We were sharper, our minds quicker, stronger, our bodies capable of enduring more disciplined, our actions precise and controlled. The small victories, like hitting the bullseye on the rifle range with a satisfying thud, or flawlessly executing a drill with synchronized precision, filled us with a quiet, internal pride that civilian achievements rarely matched. It wasn't about individual glory, it was about collective competence, the seamless operation of a well-oiled machine. When Johnson, the natural leader among us, his face etched with concern, helped Pukey Pete through the final stages of a particularly brutal run, offering a steadying hand and quiet encouragement, there was no fanfare, just a shared nod of understanding, a silent pact of brotherhood. We were a unit, a machine, each part essential, each relying on the other. But with the growing sense of accomplishment came a bittersweet realization. The end was near. Graduation loomed, a beacon on the horizon, promising an end to the relentless grind, but also signaling a separation from the makeshift family we had built. A family forged in the crucible of shared hardship. The barracks, our shared sanctuary and torment, would soon be empty of our presence. The inside jokes, the whispered complaints about the food, the shared moments of exhaustion and triumph, they would become cherished memories, fading but never truly gone. We had forged bonds that felt unbreakable, forged in the fires of shared hardship. Yet the military machine, in its relentless efficiency, would soon scatter us to different assignments, different corners of the world, like seeds on the wind. The thought was both liberating and strangely melancholic, a paradox of emotions. We had shed our civilian identities, yes, but we had also shed a part of this unique, intense brotherhood, knowing it would never be quite the same again. The final week was a blur of inspections, the scent of fresh starch and floor wax filling the air, last-minute drills performed with a practiced ease that belied the underlying tension, and the confidence course. One last time, a final proving ground. There was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of eager anticipation for freedom and a strange reluctance to let go of the familiar, demanding routine. Then came graduation day. The parade ground was immaculate, a vast expanse of emerald green, lined with rows of freshly pressed uniforms standing at rigid attention, their brass gleaming under the morning sun. The air buzzed with the murmur of families, a soft hum of anticipation, their faces a mixture of pride and awe as they scanned the ranks for their sons. Sergeant Ramirez, his voice still booming, echoing across the parade ground, but with an underlying current of something else, something almost paternal, called out our names. One by one, we marched across the stage, crisp and precise, our boots hitting the ground in perfect unison, a living testament to the transformation we had undergone. Seeing our families, seeing the profound pride in their eyes, was overwhelming, a wave of emotion that threatened to break our military bearing. My mother cried, not tears of sadness, but of profound understanding, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and admiration. She saw not the boy who had left, but the man who stood before her, forged and ready, his shoulders broader, his gaze steadier. The moment you realize your civilian self is gone, replaced by something different. That was it. That was the moment of undeniable truth, etched into our very souls. The ceremony ended with a final, thunderous hoo-ah that reverberated through the air, a collective roar of triumph and belonging. And then, chaos. Families surged forward, a joyful torrent of tears and hugs, questions tumbling out, congratulations shouted over the din. It was a strange reunion, a bridging of two worlds that had seemed so far apart, civilian life clashing with military discipline. We were different, irrevocably changed, and they saw it in our posture, our eyes, the quiet confidence that now radiated from us. The DIs, now standing a little further back, observed the scene with an almost imperceptible softening in their expressions, their stern faces betraying a flicker of satisfaction. Staff Sergeant Davis even offered a rare, gruff, "Good job, recruit," to a few of us, a terse acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It wasn't much, but it was everything, a final validation from the men who had pushed us to our limits. We said our goodbyes to our bunkmates, promises to keep in touch, exchanged with firm handshakes and knowing glances, knowing in our hearts that the chances were slim, but the bond would remain. There was a profound sense of accomplishment, a quiet confidence born of having faced the fire and emerged stronger, a collective understanding that we had earned our place. We were no longer just individuals, we were soldiers, ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace the unknown. The bus ride away from the training base was quieter than the one that had brought us in. No shouting, no chaos, just the hum of the engine, a low, steady drone, and the quiet reflection of men who had been through something profound, something life-altering. We looked out the windows, not at the world we had left behind, the civilian world that now seemed so distant, but at the world we were about to enter, a world we were now prepared to face with courage and discipline. Boot camp was over, but the journey had just begun. The lessons learned, the bonds forged, the transformation achieved. They would stay with us, a permanent part of who we were, a quiet strength that would define us in the years to come, a silent testament to the crucible we had endured. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. See you soon.